What is up, fellas, and welcome to a special episode of Rewriting History with the Goob. Today, I am joined by Max Fomitchev, the guy who has done analysis and scans of all of the predynastic vases and the modern vases, and we're going to discuss what all of this data means today. So, thank you for joining us, Max.
Hey, thanks for having me.
How did you? I assume that, like pretty much everyone, you first got interested in this through Ben's work, Ben Kirkwick.
Absolutely, yes.
How did you actually get involved? Sorry.
Yeah, I think I've been watching a few of his videos, and I realized that it's really interesting, and I thought I could actually help solve the mystery. So I reached out to him, and lo and behold, he responded, and he visited me here in Naples, Florida, because I have electron microscopes. So he brought some samples of the stone vessels for me to put in my electron microscope to see if we can find any traces of metals. And that was fun. We didn't find much of anything significant on it, which was indicative of the samples not being machined using any kind of metal cutters or metal end mills, which is expected for stone. But still, if we're speculating that this is some high ancient lost technology or alien technology, what if they use some alloys or some exotic materials? We didn't see any of that, but that's how it all got started. And then through him, I got acquainted with Matt Bell. And Matt Bell, lives nearby, about like hour and a half drive from me. So I got to meet him and viewed his collection. And he was kind enough to lend me a few of his vessels for study.
And you've been working on this for a few years now, right?
This is a year.
A year? Okay.
A year and a half, to be precise. I think it was August when I got to meet Ben when he visited. And I think I started working with Matt Bell maybe November of 2024. So it's a little over a year. Okay. And what I was going to say, it was very cool that Matt had scanned pretty much his entire collection on a CT scanner. So he shared high quality CT scans with me, which was a valuable source of data. So that's how I started crunching the numbers on these vessels. I needed high quality data, and Matt provided it. So,
and you've been definitely crunching the number. Do you have a rough estimate of how many hours you've put towards?
Oh boy, countless. I mean, I probably spent like a year working, nearly full time on this project, on and off. So I pretty much put all of my other research on back burner. So the nuclear fusion reactor you see in the back, and I haven't worked on it in the past year because I was so into the vase project. So everything else kind of went sideways. I mean, like when I went to Petrie and I came back and I had to rewrite my MATLAB code. I would get up at 6 in the morning. I wouldn't brush my teeth, wouldn't drink my coffee. I would run to my laptop and start, working on my MATLAB code. And in this manner, sitting on the couch, unshaven, without food, I'll work like till 10 at night. And when it's time, to go to bed because I'm falling asleep, and in that manner, I probably spent several months just working on code, refining and fine tuning and looking at the analysis, because one thing is writing code, the other thing is trying to make sense of the results. And then you rewrite code and you get a slightly different results, and you're like, what the hell does that mean? What the hell does that mean? And this process was fascinating for me because there are so many different ways you can analyze the data, and you get different results. And every time they were like mind blowing, like, what does this mean? What does this mean? What do I make of it? Well, let's look at it this way and that way. But eventually it all kind of aligned into a pattern, and then I published the paper. So it was a process.
And thank you for, all of your passion and hard work on this, because I've greatly enjoyed following along with your work and trying to make sense of it myself. Um, and it is very dense data, but with your most recent paper, I think you've done an excellent job of making some clear distinctions between, these separating these vases into different categories.
Mhm.
Your belief is that the OG vase, for example, the thin vase, is a modern
Right.
creation and
Or-
not
Yes. Hmm.
right. And yeah, I think your data shows that pretty clearly and pretty well. And even I've got your let's see, I've got some things pulled up here to pop on the screen. Um, if I can get it on the screen here.
Sure.
But you look at this, and like you said, trying to make sense of it, you have the handmade and the machined,
Hmm.
and based off the overall average quality of these things, they
Right.
look indistinguishable here.
Yes.
But when you start to break down the data further, you
Hmm.
start to see these distinctions
Yes.
form, and you can clearly see the difference in these. And
Mhm.
yeah, very very impressive work there. Um, so there are a lot of vessels in museums that
Mhm.
are from private collections, and they likely have modern forgeries in them as well.
Yes. Yes.
Uh, and so these vessels that don't really show 5,000 years of wear and tear on them, an idea that it's not my original idea, but an idea that was proposed is that potentially someone trying to fetch a higher, market value for these ancient vessels would polish them on a modern lathe to get that nice shiny finish and get a higher price. Do you think that with your analysis, the way that you've broken it down, um, if you were to scan the interior of those vessels, do you think you could determine potentially if that might be the case, if it is actually an ancient vessel that has been polished, or if it's
I
a
would.
true modern creation?
I see what you're saying, and I have a comment and an answer. First of all, if you do that, to historical artifacts, you're basically destroying it. So if you rework the surface, you know, basically creating a new object, and you remove, historical value. It is known that Egyptian artifacts are often, dismantled and reassembled into new pieces, but typically, um, this jewelry, like ancient Egyptian jewelry, is often redone and reworked into modern pieces. So I'm not familiar with that, being the case for like stone vessels. And I do find it unlikely that somebody would want, to put a vase like on a machine to polish it, because if you wanted to polish it, the easiest thing to do would be use like a buffer, the thing we use to buff wax on cars, and
Right.
just do that on a vessel, maybe with some wax, and that would, make it shine and make it look nice, but you wouldn't really take any material off, so it will keep all of its original shape and
Right.
imperfections. So I think, that is likely. If somebody wanted to fetch a better price for, well, let's say, a historical stone artifact, I think that's, by far the easiest thing to do, because when you mount it on a machine, you risk damaging it, because when you work on the stone, it tends to chip. An older stone is weathered, so there is just so many risks involved. So I think it wouldn't be like a smart idea, because it's far easier. You just take the rotating buffing disc, or just
And just
take a
shine
piece
it
of
up.
cloth and put some wax on it, and just go rub it, and you'll get the same effect, like without trying very hard. But to answer your really long question, um, it would be my analysis would reveal that the exterior surface has the machining quality, whereas the interior surface has the handmade quality, and that would make it an odd piece. So yeah, I'll be able to tell. And on top of my head, I don't remember seeing any objects like that. I do remember seeing objects in Matt's collection that had vastly different qualities of the interior versus exterior surface, but it was explicable to me in terms of they haven't finished, the interior.
Right.
Either they started and never finished, or somebody else found, the vase and they hollowed it out, best they could, like later, like crudely. Uh, so it was like hollowed out, or the hollowing out was finished maybe like 1,000 years later when they found this unfinished object. But I've never seen it where one surface was machined and the other was crude like that. Yeah.
Okay. And have you offered your analysis methods to museums so that they can potentially do inspect these things on their own?
Yes. Now that the paper is published, the Petrie Museum, curator read the paper and she actually praised me highly for it. And the Manchester Museum, and they already reclassified one object in their collection based off my findings as a possible forgery. Um,
Okay.
I don't think museums per se are very interested in reevaluating their collections, although
That
they were
was
precedents. And I think one of them I referenced in my work. I cannot remember which collection it was. Maybe it was in Chicago or some other museum. There's just been a lot of like talk that they had a bunch of fakes that they had to reevaluate their collection. And now there is talk about, I think, Egyptology Museum in Barcelona, that they're buying antiquities on the open market, and it's anyone's guess how genuine those things are. And then I think it was the Night Scarab who made an argument that museums display objects of public interest and not necessarily objects of historic value. So,
and they don't necessarily want to clear up that confusion. Yeah, that was
right,
the second part of my question was, are museums actually interested in
right.
using your analysis? Yeah, and it
It
sounds
really
like they
depends because, strictly speaking, museum shares the root with the word amusement. So it
right.
exists for the sake of amusement. You go there to be amused, and most people don't care whether they're amused by genuine things or fakes. They want to experience ancient Egypt, and there are recently we've been in Houston, and they had a Tutankhamun exhibit, and the entire exhibit was like recreations of what the tomb of Tutankhamun was like, and recreations of the objects that were found. So nothing about it was genuine. Yet, the creations were faithful and the atmosphere was fun. So it felt like you're Indiana Jones, exploring in the tomb of Tutankhamun. And, nobody cared whether those, were genuine artifacts or recreations, and they were recreations. So
It
it's
is a bit disappointing that these institutions have seemingly less interest in the veracity of these things than an amateur, or I guess a professional, whatever you would classify yourself as, but someone outside of the institution at least. But hopefully some do take you up on it, because I would I think that would be
yeah, I would say
valuable information.
museums probably have a healthy attitude in the sense, the collections are vast. They have tens of thousands of objects in their collections easily. Some have hundreds of thousands. So it's like unfeasible to go through all of them and evaluate them, right? And then the question becomes why. So I think the issue of authenticity arises when the object is like high value of high public interest. Let's say you have a golden mask of a pharaoh that we see on cover of magazine. Obviously, the interest would be high whether it's genuine or not, right? And because it was found in the tomb, there isn't a question. But if somebody is to find something like that and say, hey, I found a looted treasure, then of course it will be scrutinized. But it has to be a high public interest item, like the crystal skulls. Crystal skulls were a high public interest item, and they were studied in the electron microscope. And lo and behold, they found the traces of the grinding wheel.
Machining.
Basically machining traces. So therefore, the conclusion was they weren't like genuine pre-Columbian artifacts, but more likely, 18th or 19th century, artifacts made in some workshop using a grinding wheel.
Right. So these vases, you compared them to the handmade vases that are made in modern times through Egypt. And as you were saying earlier, you can reanalyze this data in so many different ways, and see, new exciting things. And so Stein-Gerdes broke down some of this analysis even further, it seems, where she fits these ellipsoid vases from the Petrie Museum to an actual ellipsoid shape rather than a circle. And they seem to show some pretty remarkable levels of precision that are almost comparable to the OG vase, which does seem to be a modern creation, with tolerances within about 10 thou. What kind of contraption? I know you've included, in fact, you've got a little diagram here as I pull up another tab, of a potential idea of how these were made. It does seem, they have 4 different axes of rotation on them, 2 on the outside and 2 on the inside, top and bottom. They do have pretty remarkable precision that, in my opinion, does not seem to be achievable with purely handheld tools. What do you think, the actual manufacturing methods of these are? What is required here? Could it be done with just wooden tools that rotate, or are we looking at, what do you think we're looking at potentially?
Okay. Well, if you read my paper, you will recall that I determined how the inner and outer surface were shaped in the sense of what subtractive machining process was used. And one of the findings of my analysis is that the outer surface was shaped by rotating the vessel itself. So the way concentricity and circularity stack up on the plot, it clearly tells us that the vase was rotated as a whole. But
Right.
it was not rotated on a lathe, on any kind of modern equivalent of a lathe, because the resulting concentricity and circularity are far inferior to what you would get on a proper lathe. But it nevertheless the vase was rotated, and the way I envision it was done, so it was probably pegged on a wooden shaft, and then I think the vase that was initially chipped and chiseled, basically sculpted into its initial form, before it was ground to its final form, was attached to the shaft, and then it was submerged into an abrasive sand, maybe quartz sand, or maybe they even used emery sand. So everybody knows that Egyptians used emery, for polishing. So it's highly abrasive, but it doesn't really matter. So they used emery or quartz sand or just sand. But if you stick, your chiseled, roughly chiseled, roughly hewn vase into this, wet abrasive, and just turn it on its axis, the longer you turn it, the more perfect it will become, in the sense that every part that sticks out, will be ground off, and you get a perfectly rounded appearance that will match the roughly hewn shape that you gave it to begin with. But it will be all round and ground, and eventually you get a thing that looks like a pebble. So it's similar to a natural process. Pebbles, sand rolls over pebbles with water. Over years, you get this perfectly rounded pebble. So
very simple, but very effective.
Right. So the vase was rotated, no question about it. But once again, the fact that we see this ellipsoidal shape, it's not a design feature. It's an artifact, and it's a common artifact known to machinists that is referred to as lobing, and it arises from the imperfection of your rotation. So let's say if you have a perfect, modern lathe with nice bearing and nice chuck, and you rotate a part on it, and then you have a cutter that's secure, rigid, doesn't move.
Right.
You get a perfect round part that you cut that way. But if your bearing sucks, or your chuck is not secure, or your cutter is loose, or has enough spring in it to where it comes into contact and then departs from the object that you're cutting, you get this lobing. And it's a common thing that machinists spot and say, oh well, that's because your system sucks. And in the extreme case, you get this massive lobing that your object looks like it's elliptical, and that's what we get in a lot of this Petri objects. So it clearly tells us that the process they used was crude by modern standards. So it's compatible with wooden contraptions where the rotation was not perfect, and the part was coming and going with contact with the abrasive, and as a result you get this like bipolar ellipsoidal shape, which is
Right.
like universally present on most of the objects I scanned.
So is that tiny little 2.5-inch jar from the Petrie Museum still the best, confirmed ancient vase that you've scanned? Because we were talking a bit before this started, and you mentioned you've scanned some new vessels since then. So is that I believe that's the most precise from the original group, but is that still the case?
It's not the case anymore, because in my second visit I found a better vase, and
Wow.
it was I'm trying to remember the material. What's the material? Say it's
Basalt,
shoot.
potentially?
No, come on, memory help me. Serpentine. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's black. It's almost like black, or dark greenish serpentine vase. That's the highest quality I've seen. It's still manual quality, but it beats the vase from my first scan. So I intend to publish the scan of it and the analysis of it. Just haven't gotten around to it. But it's pretty much, I think, approaching what you can do, the limit of quality that you can achieve manually. And of course it's
Right.
easier like on a smaller vessel. So that vase is maybe that big, like a couple inches. So I think on the smaller vessels you can have higher quality than on a larger one, just by virtue of I don't know. I mean, I'm not a machinist, so I'm probably the wrong person to ask about ins and outs of machining. But we are talking about machining in the primitive sense, right? So when we're grinding, these vases, it is still like a subtractive machining. So in my paper, I refer to it as subtractive machining, and that's what's
Right.
fascinating to me. That the Predynastic Egyptians, they've mastered the concept and the principles of subtractive machining, and we use these principles to this day. Except we've elevated the accuracy many orders of magnitude, but it's still the same principle, and they knew them all. So they rotated the vase against an abrasive material, and you get your perfect shape. Or then you take let's say a mace head, which I believe was a grinding head, and you turn that, and you get like a milling action. But
Right.
anyway, I digress.
So I mean, I'm not a machinist either, so I don't know. But looking at that small jar, it's incredible that you found one that's even more precise than that. But some of the
So
tolerances
which
on
object number is this? Let me.
the MV, it's on. I think you guys use different classifications, but it's
You
if I
still
can
should. Oh yeah, I see. It's 15. Yes, that's
that
the
little two and a
finest.
half inch.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
believe this is the most precise one from the initial
Yes.
Petri scans.
Mhm.
And it does have just remarkable levels of tolerance, again around 10 thou of an inch,
Mhm.
or 10 thou,
Yeah.
especially within the interior. One of the interior measurements is 0.144 millimeters, which is
Yeah.
directly comparable to the OG vase. Like that was, between about 0.1 and 0.3 millimeters. And so I, not being a machinist, was wondering if those types of tolerances would even be possible with wood, or if it might require something else.
An important comment to make here. So that particular vase, was it like 15604, I believe, right? It is, when you take, just that vase, let's say, and compare it to some modern, gift shop vases that were sloppy made, like quickly made by, barefoot Pakistani on a cheap, rusty lathe that's been beat up and abused. That's about the same quality. So let's say if you take, a cheap shop, Pakistani, onyx vase and compare it to
but those are still steel lathes, right? Yeah.
And compare it to this particular, Petri object, the quality is, pretty similar. So it will be hard to tell them apart. So how you tell them apart is statistics, and that's, often overlooked fact. And I'll give you an illustration. So I don't play basketball, but if you pit me against Michael Jordan and we go out into the court and we're asked, to make a hoop, by chance I can score 6 points. You've seen, plenty of videos, people making crazy shots, throwing ball without looking, and it lands into the hoop, and everybody's like, oh, wow. But it doesn't mean I am as good at basketball as Michael Jordan is, right? Because I might score, 6 points once, but I cannot score them consistently. And if he goes out and plays, or LeBron James or somebody else, they score consistently. That's like the power of statistics we often overlook. We tend to pick like an outstanding result and say, see, like if you win a lottery once, it doesn't mean you can win a lottery every time, right? It's a statistical chance. So my point is, because there is a sample of these vases. So this Petri vase with that particular number is not just a singular object. It's a part of a class, right? And when you analyze every object in that class, you get a distribution for that class. And you see that that vase, sits on the edge of that distribution. So it's not an outlier in the sense, it's not like, 6 sigma away. It's just, if you take this bell curve, it sits like on the, let's say, leading or trailing edge, depending on how you plot. So it's not like in the middle of the distribution. It's like a better sample. And this, what happens when you manufacture stuff or when you make stuff. Some things turn out better, some things turn out worse. But if you make enough of them, some will be spectacular and some will be shit. And that's why, statistics is important, because,
But it is very spectacular.
Yes. So you analyze a class of objects and they all like fit this distribution. And you can actually, and Steeny have done that, and I have done that. You can actually apply statistical measures and you say how likely that this object, belongs to this distribution. So none of those objects are like outliers in the sense they're like, the 6 sigma away. So this distribution describes the class, and some objects will be better, some will be worse. And that's, the thing that, amateurs tend to overlook, not just in archaeology, but, across other fields too. People generally, either unfamiliar with statistics or don't understand it or interpret what it means, overlook it completely and then say, oh, this result is the same as this result, therefore, but then you bring the statistical argument and say, because this guy won a lottery, it doesn't mean, he can win a lottery every time, or it doesn't mean, I scored 6 points, I can beat Michael Jordan, if I play, basketball with him. So that's my point. It is really like a remarkable object, and there will be a few that we'll find might be better, but they're still, not 6 sigma outliers, and it still fits, the same distribution, because we have to consider these objects as a class.
Right. I fully agree that they all, and again, with further analysis, looking at how they all share the same 4 different axes of creation, they all do very well seem to fit within the same category, but the precision is just so remarkable. I just wasn't
Yeah,
sure
it's
what
extremely
type of
precise.
material, whether it be a wooden machine or if it might require metal to achieve something like that. You mentioned the disc maces a few minutes ago, and I don't have nearly the same level of statistical understanding that you do, but I have looked into pre-dynastic Egypt as a whole fairly in depth, and I think in your paper you mentioned that the disc maces are found abundantly, similarly to the vases. And from what I've seen, they're actually pretty rare. There's far, far fewer of those disc-shaped maces than the vases. And I'm also not a machinist, but if you were to try and, I assume you're suggesting those are used for the interior of the vases, right?
Right. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
And once again, this is a speculation at this point. I'm
right,
working
right.
on seeing if I can, present enough data to where, there is quote unquote proof that these were like used, the way I think they were as, cutters or grinders. Um, but I'm sorry I interrupted you. You were going to make a point.
No, I mean, you're more than welcome to, but yeah, this very specifically. So your if I have your paper pulled up here somewhere. I've got too many tabs open. Um, if I can, well, I just closed it on accident. But you show a few different potential cutting tools, and I agree with the other cutting tools. The issue I have specifically with the disc mace, besides their low quantity, is that if you were to put that inside of the vase, it correct me if I'm mistaken here, but it would require simultaneous rotation of the vase and of the disc head in order to actually get circularity, or else you would just be grinding into like one side of the vase and you
I
wouldn't
see what you're
produce.
saying. So the way I think those were used for hollowing out the inside, they must have been affixed to a disc. Let's say you have a shaft and then you have a disc, and then off
Right.
center of the disc you'll have another shaft with that tool. And then when this disc rotate, this flat mace head goes in a circle. So I think that's how
Right.
it was used to hollow out the interior. So it was like going in a circle itself. Yeah, that's pretty
Oh,
clear.
okay.
Yeah, from my analysis that the inner portion of stone vessels was hollowed out by rotating the tool. So the exterior was shaped by rotating the vase itself, and the interior was shaped by rotating the tool. So that's quite clear. And there are only two candidates. One would be like a bar shaped, boring bar, and it's something we use now. So when you have a cavity that you need to hollow out, you insert a bar into it vertically, then you place it horizontally, and then you rotate that bar, and that way you hollow out a cavity. And yes, so kind of like that 15149. And the
Right.
other approach would be to use a head like 4284, but then it would need to be like on a shaft that's on a disc off center, so when the disc rotates, this whole thing goes in a circle. And I think that would explain why it's actually so well polished on the outer surface, because that's how you would polish the shoulder, that when you go through the neck of the vase, and then you have this shoulder and you go towards the body, so that part needs to be worked and polished and ground, and the exterior of that mace head is perfect for that, because it can go on a circle, and it would polish and grind the shoulder, the inner shoulder of this vase.
Okay. The that makes a lot of sense, and I hadn't considered that. So
Yeah, I
thank
haven't
you.
included an illustration for it.
Right. The only other, because the discs were something I had looked into, separately to the vases. They have rather narrow holes in them, don't they? you can see here it's
Yeah.
somewhat larger, but that tapers down. And so again, just thinking of materials, I was wondering if wood would even be strong enough to apply the necessary pressure at that thinness, or if there would be too much deflection to achieve this circularity that we see.
And the truth is, you don't need to apply pressure. So what you need to do is just turn, because it's not so much the pressure that does the job done, it's the dragging action of the abrasive. So in fact, you can cut through stone with bamboo, with string, with copper, with soft materials, soft stone. So the stone does not have to be hard, because you never like pushing on it. You just let it turn, or you just let it slide, and the fact that it drags the abrasive does the job done. So I don't think so in fact, I think if you push on it, it will break apart, and maybe that's
Right.
why there are a few mace heads that are broken apart, because at some point somebody wasn't paying attention, and maybe too much load came on it, and it just fell apart. Stone is pretty fragile. So I think the trick was, just without too much effort, let it turn, or go back and forth. Just let it drag the abrasive. Don't push on it. Don't apply force. Like my father-in-law like to say, never apply force. If you work on a mechanical part and it doesn't go, never force. So it's kind of the same thing. Stone is fragile, so just gently move it around. It will drag the abrasive. It will get the job done. So it's not the pressure per se.
Okay. I'm going to refresh just a second because
Yeah.
my camera's frozen. I'll be
It's good.
back in 2
No problem.
seconds. Okay, there we go. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. That was the only thing in your paper that, I went, maybe I don't agree with the disc maces, but that makes a lot of sense. I hadn't considered the way you described it. So thank
Yeah,
you.
and as I said, I'm still working on it, trying to put another paper together that presents all of these ideas in a more like complete manner, where the whole process is better illustrated. So what you've seen on my website and whatever I published is kind of like work in progress.
Right. And earlier we were talking about how these all do fit well within the same, statistical ranges, and they share a lot of similarities between the ellipsoid nature to
Hmm.
the different axis of rotations that they share.
Hmm.
It does suggest to me, which you also suggested in your paper, that this was an industrial process. Like this wasn't just a craftsman working with hand tools, but an industrial process. You put the water wheel up there.
Hmm.
I think you're spot on with that. I think that your analysis shows that pretty clearly, which is remarkable because from the Egyptologist point of view, that type of production is about 1,500 years or so removed from the pre-dynastic period. And so that shows a level of, well, not necessarily high technology, that shows a level of technology significantly higher than what Egyptologists believed pre-dynastics
Yeah,
had.
yeah, I would tend to agree with you. That's what motivates me to work on my second paper, where I want to shed more light on the possible technological process, because the implication would be, yeah, in pre-dynastic period, there was a level of stoneworking technology that's like unreasonably good. It's not like a space technology or alien technology. It's just uh, I would
It's
say
still
unexpectedly,
remarkable.
yeah,
Yeah.
unexpectedly good and remarkably good um, stone shaping and stone grinding, ingenious. And I cannot believe that they didn't use some level of automation, looking at all of the data, because it's pretty consistent. And especially there is no argument that basalt is a very hard stone, or diorite. So you can do it by hand. And Olga Vdovina have done it by hand, and it only
Right.
took her 2 years. Yeah,
Right.
and one of my arguments is, people aren't stupid. So even if your pharaoh or your lord comes to you and makes an order, and you have to do something, they still had to pay money. It's not like everybody was a slave, and even if it was a slave, you got to feed a slave for 2 years, which also means that that slave is not going to be involved in some other more productive activity. It all boils down to economics. You cannot be like unreasonably stupid and say, hey, do this just because I have a whim. Everybody could count money, from prehistoric times. So it all boils down to economics. So if a pharaoh or a king, had an order for these vessels,
Right.
and
Yeah.
whoever owned the shop, they weren't stupid. They figured, well, how can we do this faster? Because if we sell only one vase to the pharaoh, we're going to make 1 bar of gold, and if you sell 10, it will be 10 bars of gold, something of that nature. And why not use a donkey, or why not use a water wheel or some other contraption? So I do think it was like semi-industrial setting. It kind of like manufacturing in the 17th or 16th century, when they started automating things, started automating looms, or other trinkets and things that they were making. So it's similar to that, and it is fascinating, especially if you go into early dynastic times, when they started making gneiss, stoneware. Uh, so the scale of that production was mind-bending. Like tens of thousands of bowls, were produced. And how the heck, even over a course of few hundred years, uh, you produce tens of thousands of this, maybe as many as 100,000, and they find like a bunch of rough outs. So if you go to the quarry site, it's just littered with rough outs for the future vessels. To the point,
So
like everywhere you look, you see this block that they started haven't finished. So I mean,
right.
it has to have been some kind of automation to allow for that scale of production.
The I the so with the pre-dynastic vases specifically, both from their consistency in the way they were manufactured, the shared traits across them, and the volume of them, it does seem pretty definitive that there was some degree of industrialized process there. When you get into the dynastic Egyptian times, it seems to be a different process. The quality, is not necessarily as consistent. The features aren't necessarily as, it seems more indicative of hand tools. And they had a much larger population. They had a much more organized population. And then later in, I'm talking early dynasties, the first through the fourth dynasties and such. Later in the dynasties, you do again start to see this, what appears to be, lathe work and industrialization again. But
I would
it
actually
seems that
correct you.
there was a loss of technology between the pre-dynastic and the very early dynastic time periods. From
I would
my
actually correct you. So that was the purpose of my second visit to the Petrie Museum and to the Manchester Museum. I wanted to scan more of the like early dynastic objects and late dynastic, just to answer the question that you're bringing up. At what
right.
point does the quality did the quality start to decline, or did it start to improve? And I still need to analyze that data a bit more, but it seems that early dynastic quality is equivalent to pre-dynastic,
Okay.
but there seems to be a decline around the New Kingdom. So by the time they got to New Kingdom, that seems to be somewhat worse. But I don't have like a lot of data points yet to be like extremely definite about it. But that's one of my current interests. I want to see how the quality of stonework changed over the period of time. But it
Right.
seems that early dynastic, like up to the fourth dynasty, is equivalent to pre-dynastic in quality. except that they shifted, from this like basalt towards like gneiss and some other, types of stones, and it was more like bowls that they were making as opposed to, jars or pots. Uh, so there is this change in fashion, but the bowls they made, were remarkable quality. To where I once again I would speculate, but I think they had a stone made that would grind the interior of a bowl, and you turn it, and you turn it, and the more you use it, the more perfect your grinder becomes, and the better and
Right.
better shapes it becomes. So with that approach, it's eventually possible to approach machine quality, because the more you use that grinding stone, the more
Right.
perfect
Well,
it becomes, and you cannot tell whether it was like machined on a real machine or whether it was done by grinding, because the reason we think machines are so cool is because on a machine you can actually achieve a specific shape. That's like why we have grinders, why we have lathes, because you give like a blueprint and say, this is the profile I want, right? Or this is the radius I want. Whereas with this, ancient technology, the shape was nice, but it was like that shape and you couldn't get another one. It's just because the
right.
grinder, acquired that shape, and that's the shape you're going to get. And it's going to get, slightly larger or slightly smaller depending on how the stone wears off. It's not like, you could come into a predynastic craftsman and say, hey, I need exactly like 12 inches and this is the profile I want. And that was impossible. And that's like a key difference between modern technology and ancient technology. So it's possible to do a lot of like wonderful things as long as you don't have like a specification. Want like 4 inches deep and then 6 inches wide, and angles you need to be like 60 degrees. But if you want something
And
that looks nice, you can get that, but it's like not made to
those,
spec. It's not made to tolerance. Yeah.
so I understand you're still just beginning to analyze the data from your newer scans, but were the bowls included in some of those scans? Were you scanning some of those
Yes. Yes. The scan
bowls?
bowls, and they look like remarkably well made.
I have
I mean, it's
a
still work, but remarkably well made. Yeah.
I have a guess at what you might find, and tell me if from what your initial findings, if this is correct. So kind of what you were just describing with a bowl, you don't have like a thinner neck that you have to go down
Right.
and then hollow out, which requires more of that kind of machining idea. Whereas with a bowl, like you said, you can just kind of set a rock into it and rotate it, and you'll
Yeah.
naturally get that round
Yeah.
shape. On the
Mhm.
bowls, I would expect a larger discrepancy of precision from the interior to the exterior than you see on the vases potentially.
Oh, let me
You would
pull
see
up one
the
of the
interior
reports.
being pretty precise, with the exterior maybe being a bit rougher than the exterior of the vases.
Yeah, that's for sure seems to be the fact as far as circularity goes. I'm looking at the plot now. So the interior has pretty damn good circularity. I would say like on par, with machining. Concentricity isn't that great for the interior, but yeah, it's much better than the exterior.
Right. And so
So that is correct.
I again kind of wonder if that machining technology was a bit lost from the pre-dynastic times, because that circularity for a bowl doesn't require that same machining. It can be done potentially
Good
through
question.
hand methods.
Good question, and you might be right because it's so that's an interesting question because as time progressed, so did the variety of or other preferential shapes of the stone vessels made, and that's one way the stone vessels are attributed to a certain period is by the shape. So during
Right.
the early dynastic periods, it was about bowls. So I'm top of my head, I'm not aware of whether they made any jars that were like similar. Um, I know like a couple of jars I scanned were considered like early dynastic, but there wasn't like a specific, dynasty they were attributed to, like maybe first dynasty, which you could say, well,
Right.
it's still Predynastic. So,
And there
for
are
example, I don't know.
heirlooms as things
Yeah,
get
I don't
passed
know if
down through the
any,
time, so those classifications aren't always perfect. Yeah.
yeah. So I don't know if any like jars per se were made in the fourth dynasty, for example. I don't want to say none were. I just haven't studied it, but I did look at the 17th dynasty, and that wasn't as good. So clearly, by the time the 17 dynasties occurred, some technology was lost, and that
The
is unfortunately common in history, especially as far as crafts go. Yeah, I mean, we have Damascus steel as an example, Roman concrete as an example, and because this craft lives within this group of craftsmen. So one
you don't want to
craftsman
share it
teaches
freely.
another, teaches another, right? And then let's say a war happens or a plague, and that knowledge will be lost, and
Yep.
and it will take like a while to rediscover it, and maybe you will not rediscover it because maybe some smart people came up with ingenious ways of doing things, and then it will take another 100 or 1,000 years or 10,000 years to figure out the same stuff. So
Right.
it's actually in the historical context, it's very easy to lose knowledge just because the group that keeps it alive is so small, and if you
Absolutely.
disrupt it, like if you drop a bomb on Silicon Valley or in Taiwan, we'll be set back 1,000 years as far as semiconductor industry goes. Despite papers published and despite drawings and product samples, there's so much know-how. That's one of the reasons we cannot rebuild the F1 engines from the Saturn V rocket. Despite it flying in the 60s, the know-how is lost. So now we're starting from scratch. It's
Right.
it's a thing.
Okay. So the just from visually looking, I've not scanned these things, but the 19th dynasty, you start to see very, very, very impressive looking things again. If you ever get a chance to inspect some of those, you might find some. I'd be curious to see what level of, precision and quality we see in
Yeah.
those because they look spectacular just to the eyeball.
Just send me links. Yeah,
You,
I'll check it out.
you, you like everyone, got into this because you thought there might be a potential for high technology, and you've changed your position on that, based on the data, which I'm,
Mhm.
glad you did, because I want the truth. I certainly want the truth. I know that pretty much everyone who got interested in these vases was on the basis of this idea of high technology. So with,
Mhm.
all of the people that you're working with, um, have they received your change of opinion well? Are there has that upset people, or are they, are they resistant to this idea? Are they kind of in agreement with you and are also just seeking the truth and moving forward with that knowledge? Or how would you,
Yeah, good
describe that?
question. So the YouTube video that I released like a few months ago, where I present my result, I received a lot of hate, because of it. People
Yeah.
in the comments were very furious, and they basically accused me of selling out. That I've been paid off by Zahi Hawass or whoever, some
Right. Zahi,
to
yeah.
where I was forced, to change my opinion. So there were a lot of angry people because the myth about the precision of the vase is such a nice story that poking a hole in it is uncomfortable for believers, let's say, seeking entertainment, because all of a sudden I'm like pissing on their parade, and it's not high tech. So there were a lot of upset people. Uh, some collectors that I correspond with, they have enough common sense to where they say, oh well, we have some genuine objects and some are fakes. But I think it's comforting for them to know that at least some of their objects are genuine, because that's what my analysis says. Well, if it looks like it's Predynastic, it's very much likely to be of that origin, because it's a specific manufacturing technique that you need to work on to recreate. Whereas if you want to forge something, it will be either like a hand quality that is very distinct, or will be a machine quality that's very distinct. But some collectors, are reserved, and I frankly don't know what they think, because I don't want to rub it in them and say, "Hey, you've got fakes." Besides, it's like a court case. I haven't seen a man, pull a trigger, right? Just piece the evidence, and I say it's very much likely not to be genuine. I cannot say that, with 100% certainty, because in order to say it was 100% certainty, you need like a dating tool, right?
Right.
Like, unfortunately, we cannot like carbon date the rocks. So I would say no rock you can say it's 1,000 years old or 10,000 years old, just because there is no way to date it. So all I can say is, just based on how it's made, it's unlikely to be of ancient origin. And obviously, I don't want to rub it into anybody. So I know that some people are still thinking about it, but people that seek entertainment, they're not happy about it, and I get a lot of hate, and that explains why Stine doesn't want to be involved anymore, because she received a lot of pushback and a lot of hate.
That was very unfortunate. Yeah.
About her findings, and people that asked her to do the work in the first place weren't happy with her results, and that's why there was a falling out. But that's what I would say. If you approach, let's say, a scientist and you want an honest opinion, you cannot be mad about the outcome of the research. Yeah, and that's unfortunately also a problem with academic science too, especially in medicine. When pharma approaches scientists and say, "Hey, do a trial on this drug," and they don't like the outcome, right?
Yeah.
So it's the same thing here. If an interested group, let's say a collector or enthusiast group, approaches a scientist and say, "Hey, what do you think?" and you don't like the conclusion.
Yeah.
Well, it's not like scientist's problem. It's your problem. I think a scientist must strive to be honest. It doesn't mean I'm not wrong or I'm right.
Well,
I could be wrong too, but
I know you got some. I know you got some hate for it, but I know I very much appreciate your honesty. I'm very grateful for that. It's very unfortunate what happened with Stine. Because I really enjoyed following both of your work. And I know that she was doing this just out of passion and curiosity. Have you been paid for your work, or are you also just doing this out of your passion and your curiosity? Yeah, so even more I appreciate. Even more I appreciate. Thank you. That's incredible. Yeah, I wish so too, because you deserve it. You've put in a lot of very hard work. Yeah, and I hope that more people come around. It's disappointing to hear. I think with time you'll hopefully get some more love rather than hate. But I give you all the appreciation I can.
Yeah, but
so thank you.
Frankly, I don't care, what other people think, whether you agree, disagree. What matters to me is, I present my findings, truthfully, and I speak my mind openly. And if I'm wrong, I'll change my opinion again. So I think, trying to be honest is important. Yeah, and whether you agree with my conclusions or not, it's your choice, and I respect you disagree. So I don't care what others think. What I really want is present my findings, truthfully, including my raw data, so you can reanalyze it. And if you find a mistake, I'll be happy to hear it. Or if you derive a different conclusion, I'll be happy to see it. Or if you find other artifacts that are perfect and have provenance leading them, to the excavation site, we'll be forced to rewrite the history. I still very much would like, to find an artifact like that and rewrite a history. It just hasn't happened.
Well, I think you already have rewritten history. even maybe not to the degree that you were hoping for, but you have definitely changed our understanding of pre-dynastic Egypt.
It's
Yeah,
kind of you to say.
pretty significantly.
Thank you.
So
So my point is,
before
the
I
search is not over. We're still
right,
searching.
right. Before I let you go, I do have a couple questions
Sure.
from the audience about some of your other work, if that's okay.
Of course.
The first one is, what was the eureka moment in your cavitation experiments that convinced you this room temperature fusion approach is real and scalable? And how do you plan to get prototypes into real world testing?
Good question. I think the eureka moment for me was when I saw that the oil can carry a considerable electrostatic charge, and I do have like several people that are interested in funding this research to where we can do something commercial. Yeah, but what I'm debating among the demons that occupy my mind is whether I should just bite the bullet and put all of this research into public domain, because I had so much bad experience in my past dealing with investors, because most of them turn out to be crooks with ulterior motives, to where I almost have like PTSD. Yeah, and I'm thinking maybe I should just put it all in the public domain and let people fund it if they want, or take it and run with it, but it will not be patentable if I disclose all of the things that I find and put it in public domain. It will not be patentable, but if everybody will be able to use it. So that's something I'm considering, and if anybody listening is interested in this project, by all means contact me, and we can discuss various approaches and challenges. So basically, to get this technology off the ground and into a product, it will be a team effort, in the sense that what I do best is I discover things. That's what I do best, right? So I notice things that others tend to not notice, and I can build around it. But making a product and a commercial success takes a different kind of person. 15 years ago I could be that person too, but not anymore. Now I want to be a discoverer, a scientist, an engineer, and I would leave entrepreneurship and finances to somebody else. And if there is a person among you with integrity and passion, I'll be happy to talk and see how we can
Right.
join
Well,
join.
hopefully, yeah, hopefully.
Yeah,
So
thank you.
the next one was, what hidden physics are the key to room temperature fusion? Are any other countries working on these key areas of physics?
Well, strictly speaking, China, Taiwan, Korea, Russia, and India, and Italy, they have
Okay, quite a
groups.
few.
Japan, they all have groups that work on room temperature fusion approaches. Unfortunately, most of those approaches are flawed, and the reason I know is because I pretty much know everyone who's working in this area is called cold fusion or low energy nuclear reactions, and my core expertise is radiation detection. So the data that these groups present is always flawed as far as radiation that they report uh, isn't there. And that's why I make the neutron and gamma detectors and the software that I sell to other researchers, universities, because I developed this protocol that is able to tell whether or not you're getting radiation signal that's genuine. And if anything, I know how to measure, and I've developed these measurement protocols, because I want these other researchers to keep doing what they're doing, but I want them to report the result truthfully, not because they're trying to deceive. It's just measuring isn't easy. Whether you measure a vase or you measure radiation, you measure viscosity of oil, whatever you measure, it's never easy. And people either don't bother to put time into it, or they don't have time, they don't have the resources, the mindset. There are multiple reasons why it doesn't happen. But what I've attempted to do, I attempted to provide like a turnkey solution for radiation detection for the other researchers to use, so you could focus on your experiment, and you don't spend time on the radiation detection, because my hardware and software does that for you. And at the end of the day, you get a result that's truthful, that can pass, peer review, and you know what's going on. And best I know to this day, nobody reported any earth-shattering results, and the results I've seen, yeah, basically are null results. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't keep digging. And in fact, I feel big motivation for me to really focus in 2026 on my fusion research and put Egyptology on the back burner. So I'm glad I got this paper out, because I had to close out the file, right? So paper published, file closed, I can move on. I really want to sink my teeth into fusion, because I haven't worked on it last year. I really want to work on it this year. And that's why I'm interested in meeting investors and donors who would be willing to support the fusion effort, because that's what I feel I really need to focus on. Otherwise, our electricity prices will double or triple in the next 5 years, because of the AI sucking all of the power out of the grid, and we're already feeling it. So I might as well focus on giving like free energy to everyone, so we don't have to pay anything to electricity. And if not this, what else is worth spending your time on? I don't know.
Vases.
But yes,
no.
I can always go back to vases.
I think you might have indirectly answered the final question there, but what's your opinion on the work of Bob Grenier in this area?
Well, I know him personally, and we are friends. So I'm really happy with the work that he's doing. But I must admit, I don't comprehend what he's doing, and every time I'm trying to pay attention, and I just don't get it. Uh, and I'll leave it at that. Um,
Okay.
in my mind, the biggest value from a researcher or a scientist in any field comes from the fact that you must make the outcome of your work accessible. Because if it's accessible, it means whatever you learn, you can teach others and pass the knowledge, along, to the next researcher, to the next generation. So I think that should be, the key aspiration of any researcher: just learn something, make it accessible, publish it to where the next person learns it and they can build upon it. And every time I'm trying to look at Bob's work, I cannot learn anything, and maybe it's because I'm dumb, or maybe there's something else is going on. It's just unfortunately incomprehensible for me. But maybe somebody else can learn something from it. But I do hope that he can present it in a bit more accessible manner, and maybe it's just because I'm dumb. I don't know.
Okay. Well, all of this is over my head. I don't know anything about it, but thank you for answering those questions. I'm the person who asked them will definitely appreciate it. Before I let you go, is there anything that you would like to, say or plug? I know that you've recently tried to commission modern recreations of the vases, and you're seeking donations to help with that, because it is $10,000, which is nothing to sneeze at. So
Right.
I put a link to that in the description. But if there's anything at all that you would like to share.
I'd like to say two things. I'd like to invite people to visit my website, which is maximus.energy. Just maximus.energy, and you get to see the nuclear hardware that I make. You get to read my blog where I write, on physics or in Egyptology and whatever else about fusion, my fusion work also. And I do it because I got so much hate for my, let's say, debunking of the vases. And the common comment was, oh, this, cannot be made now. And I say, what about vases I measure? They, oh, those are soft stones. What about, there's granite urns, that I purchased, hard stone. They say, oh, no lock handles and haven't been properly hollowed out. So it seems that, people who don't want to believe, no matter what you throw at them, they come up with an excuse. But because it was like a common theme, oh, this cannot be made, you cannot make it with thin walls, I said, well, let me find a manufacturer. And I found a few manufacturers in China. And unfortunately, these are like large stone shops that primarily make funerary goods, meaning it's graves, tombstones, urns for graves,
and they make them in bulk.
and they make implements for the houses of the rich. So they make like columns and these giant, outdoor things. And when I ask them, well, I want this, small vase made, and I want only 10 of them, they usually don't want to take the job because there is no money in it.
Right.
And if I say, well, I really want this done, the only reason I can convince them if I pay, for the startup cost. And startup cost, well, you gotta, get all the tooling set up, get all of the CNC set up to make 10 vases, and then $10,000 it will pay for 10 vases. But if I ordered 100, would be still maybe not 10, maybe $20,000. So the cost, it's not like a cost of making a vase; it's a cost of getting their attention because it's like small change. A more fruitful approach would have been, to go to a stone artist, who makes this. But artists are artists. They work on whatever they want to, and you approach them and you say, hey, I want you to make this, and you chase them because they're not like terribly interested, and it's not so much I'll pay you money to do it. It's I'm an artist too, and I want to work on what I'm interested. I don't care about your stupid vase. It's one of those things.
Are you familiar with Bison Hill Stonecraft?
Exactly. I was trying to get in touch with him, and Night Scare was able to communicate with him. I wrote to him like a couple of times, haven't heard back. But that's would be a perfect candidate, to do it, because he's got all the setup already, and he can do just one vase because that's what we really.
And he seems to have some interest in these vases as well. So
yeah, so maybe you can ping him too, and he say Max is doing this, and heck, we'll pay him if he can do a vase for us too. My other option is to go to the machine shop where I order parts for but it's not their forte. We'll have to work together to get it to retool from steel cutters to grinding wheels. But I know it's possible, and I know 10,000 would cover the effort because the guy charges like $100 an hour. Yeah, why would he work for less? Because he's busy. So that's the thing. You kind of need money. Yeah, and I'm at a point to where I'm not in a position to spend any more out of pocket because I paid for the scanner, I paid for the trips, I paid for the paper. I could have bought my wife a Corvette, and instead I have a privilege to talk to you folks here, and my wife puts up with it, but I don't think she'll understand if I blew another $10,000 on making a vase just because I wanted to prove troll on YouTube wrong. It just doesn't make sense.
Right.
So I say, if you want to prove me wrong, chip in, and then I can get it commissioned, and if you contribute $1,000 or more, you'll get a vase. So I think it's a fair deal.
Yeah, no. Well, thank you so much, Max, for your time and for the conversation. I greatly enjoyed it. And I hope to see those results from the more recent scans, and I'm very excited to look at those and analyze them. After analyze your analysis. But thank you so much for joining me.
All right. Well, thanks, Goob. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
That's the show, folks. That was good. That was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I'll catch you guys soon. Peace out, fellas.